The hallway smelled of disinfectant and something faintly metallic, like old coins or rust. Carlos Ramirez adjusted the strap of his backpack and glanced at the clock above the classroom door. 5 minutes past 9. The second bell had already rung, but Miss Thompson hadn't arrived yet. The students waited in silence, except for the soft tapping of Jessica Navarro's pen against her desk. "She's never late," Jessica whispered. Carlos shrugged, his eyes drifting to the window. Outside, the Texas sun painted long shadows over the cracked pavement of the courtyard. The school had a way of feeling both too hot and too cold at the same time, like the air conditioning was trying to fight a losing battle. Then the announcement came. All students are reminded that restroom access is restricted during class hours unless accompanied by staff. Repeat, no restroom use without a pass. A collective groan echoed through the room. Jessica raised her hand. "What if it's an emergency?" she asked. No answer came. The classroom door creaked open, and Miss Thompson entered, her expression tight. Her eyes met Carlos's for a second. There was something hesitant in them, like she wanted to say something but didn't dare. As class began, Carlos couldn't focus. His thoughts kept circling back to that announcement. He had read somewhere that Texas law required schools to allow reasonable access to restrooms. Was this legal? He looked over at Jessica, who was clearly uncomfortable, shifting in her seat. At lunch, Carlos brought it up. "I think they're breaking the law." Jessica frowned. "You sure?" "Pretty sure. I'll look into it tonight," he said. Later that day, as Carlos left school and biked past the tall wire fences surrounding El Paso West High, he felt something tighten in his chest. It wasn't just about bathrooms. Something about this place felt wrong. Like they were all being watched. And maybe they were. Carlos sat cross-legged on his bedroom floor, his laptop open, papers scattered around him. The glow from the screen cast sharp shadows on the wall behind him. He was deep into state education codes, his fingers scrolling through line after line of policy. It was there, hidden in dry legal language. Students were entitled to reasonable restroom access. No mention of needing to be escorted. No blanket restriction during class hours. He scribbled notes onto a yellow notepad, circling phrases like reasonable access and health considerations. His heart pounded. He wasn't just imagining it, something really was wrong. The next morning at school, he met Jessica by the vending machines. "I found it," he said. Jessica raised her eyebrows. "The law?" Carlos nodded. "They're definitely violating it. I printed everything. We need to talk to someone." They agreed to approach Miss Thompson after class. But when they did, she looked around nervously and shook her head. "I know," she whispered, "but I can't get involved. Not without risking my job." Jessica's jaw tightened. "So, we're just supposed to accept this?" Miss Thompson's eyes softened. "Not accept. Just be careful." Carlos and Jessica exchanged a glance. It was a warning. They weren't just facing a bad policy. They were going up against something bigger. That night, Carlos tucked the printed documents into a folder and slid them under his bed. A tiny voice in his head wondered if he was already in over his head. But another, louder voice said, "Keep going." The next few days passed with uneasy calm. Carlos kept his head down, trying not to attract attention. But something had shifted. Teachers avoided eye contact. Hall monitors lingered longer near the restrooms. Then came the discovery. Jessica pulled Carlos aside near the science wing. Her face was pale. "There's a camera inside the restroom entrance," she whispered. Carlos blinked.
"What?"
"Are you sure it's not just in the hallway?" "It's angled in. I saw the red light. It's recording." They waited until the final bell, then snuck back toward the building. From a safe distance, they peeked around the corner. There it was, a small black dome mounted just above the restroom door, pointed slightly downward and inward. "That's not legal," Carlos murmured. "That can't be legal." Jessica's voice was tight. "We need proof." Over the weekend, Carlos borrowed his cousin's phone, one with a zoom lens. On Sunday, they biked to the school grounds and, from across the street, snapped photos of the camera. They printed the images and added them to the folder under his bed. That night, Carlos couldn't sleep. He stared at the ceiling fan, listening to it tick-tick-tick like a clock counting down. He didn't know what they were walking into, but he knew this was bigger than restroom access now. Jessica texted at 2 a.m. One word. Tomorrow? He replied, yes. Monday morning arrived heavy with tension. Carlos and Jessica met behind the bleachers before first period. Jessica wore her hoodie pulled up, eyes scanning the empty field. We can't go to the administration, she said. They already know. And they're covering it up. Carlos nodded. Then we go to the students. Quietly. They started small. Whispers in the library, messages passed during lunch, conversations in stairwells. It turned out others had noticed strange things too. Teachers who used to be friendly now seemed withdrawn. A girl from sophomore year said she'd been denied access to the nurse's office when she had stomach cramps. A senior admitted he'd been suspended for wandering, even though he'd just been going to the toilet. Carlos and Jessica set up a private group chat using encrypted apps. They called it Students for Rights. Within 3 days, it had over 20 members. That Wednesday, someone anonymously dropped a USB drive into Carlos's locker. On it, footage from the security system. Blurry, but undeniable. One clip showed a student entering the restroom. The timestamp matched the day he'd later been written up for disruptive behavior. Jessica stared at the screen. They're watching everyone. Carlos felt cold. We need to go public. But how? He remembered his uncle's friend, Luis Mercado, a local journalist who ran a blog about corruption in small towns. It was a long shot, but they didn't have many options left. Carlos stared at his phone for what felt like hours before finally pressing call. The line rang twice before a voice answered. Luis Mercado. Hi, this is Carlos Ramirez. I'm Diego's nephew. You helped him with that housing permit issue last year. A pause.
Right.
Carlos. What's going on? Carlos took a breath. My school is breaking the law. And we have proof. Cameras watching students. Policies that violate basic rights. We need help. Luis didn't answer right away. Then, calmly, he said, meet me tomorrow. 6 p.m. Café Rosario on East Sunset. Bring everything. That night, Carlos and Jessica gathered every file, printout, and video clip. They sorted everything into folders, made backup copies, and rehearsed what they would say. It felt like preparing for a trial. At Café Rosario, Luis was waiting at a corner table with a notebook and an old camera. He listened, asked questions, occasionally scribbled notes. You're brave, he said when they finished. But this won't be easy. Schools don't like being exposed. And they have powerful friends. We're not looking for attention, Jessica said. We just want it to stop. Luis nodded. I'll write the story. But if I publish this, there's no going back. The school will retaliate. Be ready. Carlos and Jessica exchanged a glance. The weight of what they were doing settled fully in that moment. We're ready, Carlos said. Luis opened his laptop. The first line he typed was the headline. Has your school ever done something illegal? The article dropped on a Thursday morning. By second period, everyone at El Paso West High had read it. Luis had pulled no punches. The headline was bold, the screenshots damning. An embedded video clip showed the blinking red light of the camera above the restroom. There were quotes from anonymous students, policy references, even a blurry still of a staff member escorting a student away from the nurse's office. The district's response was immediate. A letter went out to parents claiming the footage was taken out of context and that restroom policies were in line with safety protocols. But it was too late. Students started walking out. At exactly noon, Carlos, Jessica, and nearly 100 others gathered in the quad. Word had spread through group chats and whisper networks. Some carried signs. We deserve privacy, education, not surveillance. They sat quietly, a sea of bodies in protest. Administration panicked. The principal's voice crackled over the loudspeaker, urging students to return to class. But no one moved. Then the police arrived. 3 patrol cars parked near the front office. Officers stood near the building, arms folded. They didn't intervene, but their presence was loud. Jessica leaned toward Carlos. They're trying to scare us. He nodded. We don't scare that easy. By the end of the day, news vans were circling the block. Reporters huddled on sidewalks. Luis's story had gone viral, picked up by national outlets. The school board scheduled an emergency meeting. Carlos went home that night exhausted but electric. This was no longer a whisper. It was a shout. The school board meeting was set for Friday evening at 6 p.m. Parents, teachers, students, and local press packed into the small district auditorium. The air buzzed with tension. Folding chairs creaked. Whispered arguments broke out in the corners. Carlos sat near the back with Jessica and Luis. Cameras from 3 local news stations were set up along the aisle. Everyone was waiting. At 6:03, the board members filed in. The superintendent, Ms. Baylor, took her seat at the center of the long table. Her smile was tight. We appreciate your attendance, she began. We understand there have been concerns. A hand shot up. It was a parent, Mrs. Ortega. My daughter came home crying because she was denied access to the restroom. Are you saying that's just a concern? The room stirred. Carlos's heart thudded. Ms. Baylor raised her hand. We are reviewing all policies. The intention has always been safety. Jessica stood. Then why were there cameras aimed at restroom doors? Gasps. The board members glanced at one another. One of them, a younger man named Mr. Salinas, cleared his throat. We were not aware of any such installations violating privacy laws. If true, this will be corrected immediately. Luis leaned toward Carlos. They're scrambling. Then something unexpected happened. A teacher stood up. Ms. Ellis from the math department. We were instructed not to speak about the policy. Those of us who objected were told our jobs could be at risk. The room erupted. Shouting. Applause. Someone chanted. Shame. Shame. The board quickly moved to recess. As they left the table, security stepped in to guide them out. Carlos turned to Jessica. They're losing control. Jessica's eyes were fierce. And we're not done. By Monday, the backlash began. Carlos was pulled from class and told to report to the principal's office. Inside, Ms. Baylor sat behind her desk, flanked by 2 district officials. A folder sat between them. Carlos, she said with forced calm, we've received reports of you organizing student disruptions. That violates the student code of conduct. He stared at her. We protested. Peacefully. One of the district men leaned forward. Regardless, you're being placed on a 2-day suspension. Effective immediately. Word spread fast. Jessica was called in next. Then 2 others from the Students for Rights group. All were given matching suspensions. They're trying to break us apart, Jessica said, pacing outside the front office. They're scared, Carlos replied. That means we're winning. Luis published a follow-up article that afternoon. Its headline read, Whistleblowers silenced, students suspended after speaking out. The response was immediate. Parents began contacting the district. Some threatened legal action. That night, Carlos's mother sat him down at the kitchen table. She looked tired but proud. I don't like seeing you punished, she said. But you're standing for something. That matters. The next day, despite their suspensions, Carlos and Jessica returned to the sidewalk in front of the school, holding signs. Dozens of students joined them. And then something surprising happened. Ms. Ellis, the math teacher who had spoken at the meeting, walked out of the building and stood beside them. One by one, other teachers followed. The school had pushed back. But so had they. The pressure finally forced the district to act. 2 days after the teacher walkout, an official statement was issued from the superintendent's office. It announced an independent investigation into the school's restroom policies and surveillance practices. Carlos read the statement aloud during a gathering outside the school. To ensure the safety and rights of our students are upheld, we are appointing a third-party investigator. Cheers broke out, but Jessica remained focused. Let's not celebrate yet. We still don't know who they've hired. It didn't take long. A well-known civil rights attorney from Austin, Rachel Moreno, was brought in to lead the inquiry. She arrived on campus with a team, setting up private interviews with staff and students. Carlos and Jessica were among the first called in. Ms. Moreno listened intently as they recounted everything, from the locked doors to the whisper network, the footage, the suspensions. "You've kept detailed records," she noted. "That makes this much harder to dismiss." Meanwhile, district emails leaked to the press. One showed internal panic after Luis's first article. Another revealed conversations about keeping staff quiet. Luis published a third piece, the cover-up behind closed doors. It spread even faster than the first. With mounting evidence and public outrage growing, the state education agency announced it was also reviewing the school's conduct. Media crews now camp daily outside El Paso West High. Carlos felt the tide turning. "They're being watched now," he told Jessica. "And this time, it's not just by cameras." The school board met again, this time in a larger auditorium to accommodate the public. Every seat was filled. The stage lights buzzed overhead as reporters tested their microphones. Students stood along the walls, side by side with teachers, parents, even local business owners. The board filed in, visibly tense. Superintendent Baylor took the mic. Her voice wavered slightly. "We have completed our internal review and received findings from Ms. Moreno's independent investigation." She paused. "We acknowledge that serious violations of student privacy occurred. The camera installations will be removed. The restroom access policy is being rewritten, effective immediately. And those who enacted these measures without board approval are being placed on administrative leave." Gasps, then claps. A ripple of shocked satisfaction. Carlos turned to Jessica, who let out a shaky breath. "Did we actually win?" But it wasn't over yet. Luis stood and raised his hand. "What safeguards will be put in place to prevent this from happening again?" Baylor nodded solemnly. "A permanent student oversight committee will be formed, with seats for elected representatives. Policies affecting student rights will require community review." Cheers erupted. Jessica was soon approached by a local reporter. "Do you think this sets a precedent?" She glanced at Carlos. "It's not about setting a precedent. It's about proving that when students speak, the world has to listen." Later that night, Carlos uploaded the final video to their channel. The title, "When We Fought Back." Within hours, it began trending. He didn't need to say anything more. The story had spoken for itself.